Lot 23, Clara Josephine Beckett, widow, 7 children. She stood on that auction platform, gripping the railing so hard she had splinters in her palms. Her 7 children pressed against her like they could burrow inside her skin and hide there. Too fat, someone muttered. 7 kids, might as well buy a plague. Who would want that? The price dropped. $75, $60, $50. Nobody bid. The territorial officer smiled. That thin, cruel smile. He'd told her yesterday, "We'll be splitting those brats up by sundown." Then a voice cut through the silence like thunder. $300. Every head turned. A stranger stepped forward, scarred face, gray eyes cold as winter sky. A man the whole territory called a killer, a madman, a monster. He had just paid a fortune for a woman the world called worthless. But here's what Clara didn't know. The most dangerous man in the territory was already watching from the shadows. And he wanted her children for something far worse than labor. What would you do when the man who saved you might be the only thing standing between your children and a monster? The lesson. The world may call you worthless, undesirable, a burden. The world is wrong. Your value isn't determined by who bids. It's determined by how you fight for the people you love. This story proves that being terrified and standing anyway is the definition of courage. And sometimes the person nobody wants becomes exactly what everyone needs. If this story gripped your heart, tell me in the comments, what would you have done on that auction block? Hit like if you believe every person has worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear they are enough. And subscribe so you never miss another story that will stay with you for days. The auction platform stood 6 feet above the crowd. Rough wooden planks, splintered and cold. Clara gripped the railing so hard she had splinters in her palms, but she could not feel them anymore. She could not feel much of anything except the cold and the fear. Her 7 children pressed against her like they could burrow inside her skin and hide there. Grace and Hope, the 4-year-old twins, clung to her skirts. Emma, 6 years old with golden curls, held her hand so tight it hurt. Daniel, 8, tried not to cry and failed. Charlotte, 10, stood with her fists clenched like she was ready to fight the whole world. Benjamin, 12, vibrated with barely contained rage. And Abigail, 14, wore the face of a woman who had seen too much. 7 children. 7 lives depending on Clara. The auctioneer, a thin man named Harold Finch, shuffled his papers without looking at her. His spectacles sat crooked on his nose. Ink stained his fingers. He had not made eye contact with Clara once. "Lot 23, he called out. Clara Josephine Beckett, widow, 34 years, 7 children, ages 4 to 14. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Not pity, something uglier. "Opening bid," Finch continued. $75 includes all passage fees and provisional custody of minor children. Silence. Clara lifted her chin. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made predators bolder. Beside her, Abigail gripped her hand hard enough to bruise. "Mama," Abigail whispered, "nobody is bidding." "I know. What do we do? We wait. Wait for what?" Clara had no answer. Benjamin stepped forward, his young body rigid with fury. "I could work," he said through clenched teeth. "I could find a job in the mines. We do not need some stranger to take care of us." "Ben," Clara cut him off. "Not now." "But, Mama," "I said not now." He fell silent, but his fists stayed clenched. His jaw trembled with rage. He was too young to understand that rage could not feed 7 children. Rage could not keep them warm. Rage could not stop the territorial officer from scattering them across the frontier like dead leaves. Charlotte pressed against her brother. Her red hair blazed wild beneath her bonnet, and her green eyes held fire. "If anyone tries to take us," she whispered, "I will bite him." Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth twitch. "That is my girl." $60, Finch called out, dropping the price. Surely someone needs a capable housekeeper. Nothing. Clara scanned the crowd. Farmers in worn coats, Miners with calloused hands, shopkeepers with calculating eyes. Every single one of them looked away when her gaze found them. "Too fat," someone muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "7 kids," another man whistled low. "Might as well buy a plague. Who would want that?" A big man in a beaver-skin coat laughed, tobacco juice staining his beard. "She would eat you out of house and home." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara felt Abigail stiffen beside her, felt Benjamin's rage radiating like heat from a stove, felt her younger children shrink against her, trying to disappear. She straightened her spine, looked the man in the beaver coat dead in the eye. "My children," she said, her voice carrying clear across the square, "are worth more than every man in this crowd combined." Silence. The man in the beaver coat blinked, then his face twisted with anger. "Why, you uppity little—" He never finished, because that is when Clara heard it. A whisper moving through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "Silus will not like that." Heads turned, eyes shifted toward the back of the square. Clara followed their gazes and saw him. Near the general store, half hidden in shadow, a man stood watching. Tall, dark coat, handsome in a way that made her skin crawl. His hair was slicked back, and a gold watch chain glinted at his vest. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, hungry, fixed on her like she was prey. Silas Crow. Clara had heard that name 3 times since arriving in Silver Bend, each time spoken like a curse, each time followed by silence. Now she understood why. $50, Finch called weakly. Final offer. A wife, a mother, 7 workers in one. Daniel started crying. "Mama, they do not want us. Nobody wants us." His voice rose, cracking. "We are going to get split up. I heard them say it. They are going to take us away." "Daniel." Clara grabbed his shoulders, made him look at her. "Listen to me. Whatever happens today, you are my son. You will always be my son. No piece of paper changes that. Do you understand?" He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. Emma tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Mama, why is Danny crying? He's just scared, sweetheart. I am not scared." Emma's chin lifted with impossible bravery. "You said we would be okay, so we will be okay, right? God, this child, this impossibly brave, impossibly trusting child. Right," Clara whispered. "Right." Behind the platform, a gray-haired man in a territorial officer's uniform shuffled papers. Horace Webb. Clara had met him yesterday, had seen the way his eyes crawled over her body, had heard what he said when he thought she could not hear. "Fat cow will not fetch $10. We will be splitting those brats up by sundown." Now Webb caught her eye and smiled, a thin, cruel smile that made her stomach turn. "Going once," Finch called. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "Going twice." Abigail made a sound, a small, wounded animal sound. Clara closed her eyes. "God, please, please. I have never asked for anything. I have worked and suffered and kept going. Please do not take my children. Please, gone." The word hit Clara like a physical blow, but it was not Finch's voice that spoke next. $300. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, deep as thunder, rough as gravel. Every head in the square turned. A man walked forward from the far edge of the crowd, not the shadow near the store. Someone else, someone Clara had not noticed before. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in buckskin and worn leather, a fur-lined coat hanging open despite the cold. Dark hair fell past his collar streaked with gray. His face looked like it had been carved from granite. Hard jaw, sharp cheekbones, a thin scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. But it was his eyes that stopped Clara's breath. Gray. Pale gray, like winter sky before a storm. And they were fixed on her. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Nobody touched him. Nobody spoke to him. They just moved aside, watching with eyes that held fear and something else. Recognition. Did he say 300? Finch's voice cracked. "Sir, did you say—" "You heard me." The stranger's voice carried no warmth, but no cruelty either. Just fact. 300 gold for the woman and all 7 children. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "That is," Finch swallowed hard, "that is 4 times the asking price. I know what it is." Webb pushed forward, his face red. "Now hold on. There are procedures, then follow them." The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The coins inside clinked heavily. 300 in gold. Count it if you want, but count fast. Storm is coming, and I do not intend to be here when it hits. Clara stared at him. This stranger who had just paid a fortune for a woman the whole town called worthless. "Who are you?" The words came out before she could stop them. The man looked up at her. Those gray eyes held hers without flinching. "Name is Stone," he said. "Nathaniel Stone. Folks call me Nate." Behind Clara, Benjamin sucked in a breath. "Stone," he whispered, "the mountain man." The stranger's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "That what they call me? They say you killed—" Benjamin stopped when Clara squeezed his arm hard. Nate's expression did not change. "They say a lot of things." "Are they true?" Clara asked. "Some." He held her gaze. "I do not lie about what I am, ma'am. But I do not hurt women. I do not hurt children. And I keep my word." Clara felt her children pressing against her. Felt their fear, their confusion, their desperate, fragile hope. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you pay $300 for a woman nobody wants?" Something shifted in those gray eyes. Something old and heavy. "Because I know what it is like," he said quietly. "To be the one nobody wants." Clara's throat tightened. The gavel came down hard. "Sold," Finch called. "Lot 23. To Mr. Nathaniel Stone." And just like that, Clara Beckett's life changed forever. The paperwork took minutes. Clara's hand shook as she signed her name. Clara Josephine Beckett. She wondered if she would ever write that name again. Wondered if by tomorrow she would be Clara Stone. Wondered what kind of life she had just signed herself into. As she stepped down from the platform, a woman grabbed her arm, sharp-faced, sharp-tongued. "Helena Marsh, head of the Silver Bend Bride Society." "You do not know what you are doing," Mrs. Marsh hissed. "That man is dangerous." Clara pulled her arm free. "That man just saved my children. He lives alone in the mountains like an animal, has not spoken to another soul in years. There are stories. There are always stories." Clara's voice hardened. "People told stories about me, too. That I was lazy, that I was worthless, that my children were burdens. That is different, is it?" Clara stepped closer, her voice dropping low. "Every person in this square looked at me today and saw something to throw away. That man looked at me and saw something worth saving. You want to tell me who I should trust?" Mrs. Marsh's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Clara did not wait for her to find words. Nate had a wagon waiting at the edge of the square. 2 sturdy draft horses stamped in the cold, breath steaming. The wagon bed was loaded with supplies, sacks of flour, salt pork, blankets, tools. He had planned for this. Planned to buy a family. Clara did not know if that made her feel better or worse. Nate lifted the younger children into the wagon one by one. Grace first, then Hope, settling them on a pile of blankets like they were made of glass. Emma climbed up herself, then turned to help Daniel. "I can do it," Daniel muttered, embarrassed. "I know you can," Emma said cheerfully. "I am helping anyway." Charlotte scrambled up without assistance, then stood with her hands on her hips, surveying the wagon bed. "This will do," she announced, like she was a queen inspecting her kingdom. Nate's mouth twitched again, that almost smile. He offered Clara his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was rough, calloused, warm despite the cold. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Do not thank me yet." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "It is a 2-day ride, hard country, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. Neither do I. He looked at her. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? Mama. Abigail's voice came from the wagon bed. There is a man watching us. Clara turned. Near the general store, the shadow she had noticed before had moved into the light. Silus Crow. She knew it without being told. Knew it from the way people avoided looking at him, from the way the air seemed colder where he stood, from the smile that curved his lips, a smile that did not reach his dark, dark eyes. He was handsome. That was the terrible thing. Handsome and well-dressed and polished, in a way that made civilized people trust him. But Clara had learned long ago that pretty wrapping often hid poison. He tipped his hat to her, a mockery of courtesy. "Mrs. Stone," he called across the square, "congratulations on your marriage." Clara felt Nate stiffen beside her. "Crow." Nate's voice went flat. "Dangerous. We are leaving." "So I see." Silus walked closer, hands in his pockets, that terrible smile never wavering. $300. That is quite an investment for, well, his eyes slid over Clara. Damaged goods. Benjamin lunged forward in the wagon bed. "You take that back." Clara grabbed his arm. "Ben, no." "But Mama, I know what he said." She kept her voice steady. "And it does not matter." Silus laughed softly. "Loyal children. That is good. Loyalty is valuable." His eyes moved to Abigail, lingered there. Clara stepped between them, blocking his view. "My children are not for sale. Everything is for sale, Mrs. Stone." Silas's smile widened. "It is just a matter of finding the right price." Nate climbed onto the wagon seat. His hand rested on the rifle beside him. Casual. But Clara saw his knuckles go white. "Walk away, Crow." "Or what?" Silus spread his hands. "You will shoot me in front of all these good people?" "I will do what needs doing." Nate picked up the reins. Same as always. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind howled through the square. The crowd watched in silence. Then Silus stepped back, that smile never fading. "Safe travels, Mrs. Stone. I'm sure we will meet again." He turned and walked away. The crowd parted for him like they had parted for Nate, but differently. With Nate, it had been wariness. With Silus, it was fear. Clara let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Nate snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward. Silverbend fell away behind them. Clara did not look back. For 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. The wagon creaked. The horses' hooves crunched through frozen mud. The children whispered among themselves in the wagon bed. "Who is he?" Clara finally asked. "Silus Crow." Nate's jaw tightened. A man who takes what he wants and hurts anyone who gets in his way. What does he want? Power, money, women. Nate's hands flexed on the reins. "He owns half this territory through fear and debt, runs saloons, gambling halls, other businesses I will not name with children listening." Clara's stomach turned. He was looking at Abigail. "I know. Will he come after us?" Nate was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hard as iron. "Probably." Clara felt ice spread through her chest. "Then why did you bring us out here? Why not stay in town where there are people, witnesses?" "Because witnesses did not stop him before." Nate looked at her. "And because my land is the only place in this territory he does not control." "How is that possible?" "Because he learned a long time ago that coming onto my property costs more than it is worth." Clara studied his profile. The hard set of his jaw, the scars on his face and hands, the way he held himself like a man who expected violence and was ready to meet it. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Between you and him?" Nate did not answer for a long time. The wagon rolled on. The mountains grew closer. "He wanted something of mine," Nate finally said. "I did not let him take it." "What did he want?" "Does not matter now." His voice closed the subject. What matters is he knows better than to follow me home. The land changed as they climbed higher. Flat scrub gave way to rolling hills, then steeper grades. Pine trees appeared, dark and silent. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. Nate pulled a pocket watch from his coat, checked it, frowned. Storm is moving faster than I thought. Clara looked at the sky. Dark clouds were piling up behind the mountains, thick and heavy. How far to shelter? 4 miles, maybe 5. He snapped the reins, urging the horses faster. We will make it, but it will be close. The next hour passed in tense silence. The temperature dropped. The wind grew teeth. Snow began to fall. Light at first, then heavier, swirling around the wagon like white curtains. Clara pulled blankets over the children, tucked them tight, counted heads over and over, a nervous habit she could not break. 7. Still 7. All still here. Mama. Abigail's voice was strained. Daniel is shivering. Clara looked. Her son's lips were turning blue. His thin body shook despite the blankets. Danny. She pulled him against her. Danny, look at me. His eyes were glassy. Cold, Mama. So cold. I know, baby, I know. Hold on. We are almost there. She looked at Nate. He was hunched forward, squinting through the snow, hands steady on the reins. How much farther? Mile. Maybe less. He is freezing. Nate did not look back, but his voice changed. Harder. Faster. There is a cabin ahead. Old Trapper's place. We will make it. He snapped the reins again. The horses surged forward, heads down against the wind. Clara held Daniel tight. Felt his small heart racing against her chest. Felt his shivering grow worse. Please, she thought. Please, I cannot lose another one. I cannot. The snow thickened. The world turned white. And then, through the swirling chaos, a shape appeared. A cabin, small, dark, half buried in drifts, but standing. There, Charlotte shouted. I see it. Nate pulled the wagon as close as he could. The horses were struggling now, hooves slipping on ice. Everyone out. He jumped down, already moving toward the cabin door. Now! Clara handed the twins to Abigail, grabbed Daniel in her arms. His body felt too light, too cold. She stumbled through the snow toward the cabin. The wind screamed in her ears. Ice stung her face. Nate had the door open. Dark inside, but dry. Out of the wind. Get the children in, he ordered. I will start a fire. Clara did not argue. She carried Daniel inside, set him down near the stone hearth. The other children piled in behind her, Abigail with the twins, Benjamin carrying Emma on his back, Charlotte dragging blankets from the wagon. Within minutes, Nate had a fire going, small at first, then growing, pushing back the cold. Daniel curled toward the flames, still shivering. Clara knelt beside him, rubbing his arms, his legs, trying to force warmth into his frozen body. Stay with me, Danny. Stay with me. His eyes found hers. Mama? Are we safe? She pulled him into her lap, held him against her heart. Yes, baby, we are safe. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 7 children huddled around a fire in a stranger's arms. And Clara Beckett, who had been called worthless by 43 men, felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Not safety, not yet, but the possibility of it. The fire crackled and popped, throwing dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Clara sat with her back against the rough wood, Daniel's head in her lap. His breathing had steadied, his color was returning. The crisis had passed, but another one was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The other children had arranged themselves around the hearth. Abigail in the center, Grace and Hope on her lap. Benjamin and Charlotte flanking them like guards. Emma sat at the tailgate, legs dangling, watching the door. I am watching for bad men, Emma said when Clara told her to come closer. There are no bad men out there, Clara said. Not yet, Emma grinned. But if they come, I will see them first. Charlotte snorted. What are you going to do? Throw your bonnet at them? I will throw rocks. You cannot throw worth beans. Can too. Cannot. Girls. Clara's voice carried a warning. Both fell silent. For about 3 seconds. I can throw better than Ben, Emma muttered. Cannot. Can too. Remember when I hit that? Enough. The voice was not Clara's. It was not hers. Everyone turned. Nate stood by the door, rifle in hand, face unreadable. Save your energy, he said quietly. You will need it. The children went silent, staring at this stranger who had bought their mother with gold coins and was now taking them into the mountains. Daniel spoke first. Small voice, trembling. Sir, where are we going? Nate glanced back at him. My homestead, 2 days north. Is it nice? It is safe. But is it nice? Something shifted in Nate's face, almost soft. It is home. That is better than nice. Daniel considered this, then nodded slowly. Hope started crying again. Grace joined her, as always. The twins did everything together, laughing, crying, sleeping. Clara had never been able to tell if it was comforting or concerning. Mama! Grace reached for her. I want up. Clara gathered both twins in her lap. They burrowed against her immediately, small and warm and terrified. Shh, she murmured. Shh, we are safe now. The scary man, Hope whimpered. He looked at Abby, mean. Clara's arms tightened around them. He cannot hurt us. Promise? There it was again. That word. I promise, Clara said. Another lie, another prayer dressed up as certainty. Hours passed. The storm screamed outside. Inside, the fire burned low, then Nate built it up again. The children fell asleep one by one, exhausted beyond measure. Clara dozed against the wall, still holding the twins, still counting heads in her dreams. 7, still 7, all still here. She dreamed of Samuel, not the sick, wasted man he had become at the end, but the young carpenter who had swept her off her feet at a church dance in Boston. He was smiling at her, telling her something important. Take care of our babies, Clara. They need you. I know. And let yourself be loved again. You deserve it. She woke to a hand on her shoulder. Nate crouched beside her, his face tight. We have company, he said quietly. Clara's blood turned to ice. How many? 3 riders, coming up the trail. She looked toward the window. Through the frost-covered glass, she saw them. 3 dark shapes cutting through the white curtain of snow, moving slow but steady toward the cabin. And even through the swirling storm, she recognized the man in front. Silus Crow had found them. Clara's heart stopped. Get the children away from the windows, Nate said. All of them, now! Clara's body moved before her mind caught up. She woke Benjamin with a touch. He came alert instantly, eyes wide. Mama? Trouble. Help me move the others. Together they gathered the children. Abigail with the twins, Charlotte supporting Daniel, Emma half asleep but obedient. Back corner, Clara whispered. Behind the woodpile, stay quiet. But Mama, Benjamin started. Now, Ben. He obeyed. But his fists were clenched, his jaw was tight. Clara turned back to the window. The riders were closer now, close enough to see faces. Silus Crow rode in front, that terrible smile stretched across his face. Behind him, 2 men, one big and bearded, one thin and twitchy. Stone, Silas's voice carried over the wind. I know you're in there. Come on out. Let us talk like civilized men. Nate positioned himself by the door. His rifle rested easy in his hands, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. Stay behind me, he told Clara. I am not hiding. Did not ask you to hide. He glanced at her. Asked you to stay behind me. There is a difference. Clara moved to his left side, close enough to see through the gap in the door planks, close enough to feel the cold seeping through. What does he want? She whispered. What he always wants. Everything. Outside, Silus dismounted. His 2 men stayed on their horses, hands resting on their gun belts. Stone! Silus called again. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. I just want to talk. Nate's voice came out flat and cold. Say what you came to say, then leave. Now, that is not very hospitable. Silus spread his hands wide. Inviting a man to stand out in a blizzard? I thought mountain folk had better manners. You are not a guest. You are a trespasser. Silus laughed. That sound made Clara's skin crawl. Trespasser? This is not your land, Stone. This is territorial property, public cabin. I got as much right to shelter here as you do. He took a step closer. Nate raised the rifle. That is far enough. Silus stopped. His smile did not waver, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Calculation. Assessment. You will not shoot me. Not in front of all those children. What kind of example would that set? The kind that keeps them alive. Behind Clara, she heard Hope whimper. Grace shushed her with a small, frightened sound. Silas's eyes moved past Nate, past Clara, into the shadows of the cabin. 7 children, he said softly. That is quite a brood, Mrs. Stone. Must be hard keeping them all fed, all warm, all safe. Clara's hands curled into fists. My children are none of your concern. Oh, but they are. Silus took another step. Nate's finger tightened on the trigger, but Silus stopped just at the edge of shooting distance. See, I am a businessman, and I see opportunity everywhere I look. Those boys of yours. They are strong. They could work my mines. Good wages. Good. Honest labor. No. And those girls... His eyes gleamed. Pretty things. Especially the oldest. What is her name? Abigail? Clara moved before she could stop herself. She grabbed Nate's arm. Not to hold him back, but to steady herself. Because if she did not hold on to something, she was going to run out into that storm and tear Silus Crow apart with her bare hands. You stay away from my daughter. Silus raised an eyebrow. Such fire. I like that. He tilted his head. Tell you what, I will make you a deal. Come with me willingly, you and the children. And I will let Stone here walk away. No harm done. No blood spilled. And if I refuse, then things get complicated. Silus glanced at his men. See? I have got 2 guns behind me. More back in town. Stone is good. I will grant him that. But he is not that good. And even if he is, he shrugged. Bullets do not care about skill. They just care about numbers. Nate's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You are forgetting something, Crow. Oh? What is that? I do not have to be good enough to beat all of you. Nate's eyes locked onto Silus. Cold. Certain. I just have to be good enough to kill you first. For the first time, Silas's smile faltered. You would die right after, he said. Maybe. Nate shrugged. But you would be dead. And dead men do not collect debts, do not run businesses, do not hurt women and children. He paused. You willing to bet your life on how fast I can pull this trigger? Silence. The storm howled around them. Snow swirled and screamed. But inside that bubble of tension, everything was still. Clara watched Silas's face, watched him calculate, watched him weigh his greed against his fear. This is not over, Silus said finally. It is for tonight. The storm will not last forever, Stone, and neither will your luck. He turned, walked back to his horse, mounted up slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I will be seeing you, Mrs. Stone, he called over his shoulder, you and those pretty children of yours. Then he kicked his horse forward, and the 3 riders disappeared into the white. Clara's legs gave out. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor. Her whole body shook, not from cold, from something deeper. Clara. Nate was beside her in an instant. Clara, look at me. She looked up. His gray eyes were steady, anchoring. They are gone, he said, for now. For now. The words tasted like ash. He will come back. Yes, he wants my children. I know. He wants... Her voice broke. He looked at Abigail like she was... I know. Nate's voice hardened. He will not touch her. Will not touch any of them. I swear it. How? Clara grabbed his arm. How can you promise that? You saw him. You saw what he is. He has men, money, power. What do we have? Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he said, We have higher ground. The storm broke by morning. Clara woke to gray light filtering through the cabin's single window. The world outside was silent, buried under fresh snow. Peaceful, if you did not know what hunted them. Nate was already awake, still sitting by the door, still watching. How long was I asleep? Clara asked, straightening. Few hours. You should have woken me. You needed rest. She looked around the cabin. Her children were scattered across the floor, bundled in blankets, sleeping soundly. Even Benjamin, who always had trouble sleeping, was curled up near the woodpile, mouth open, drool pooling on his sleeve. They look peaceful, she said. First time they have felt safe in a while, I reckon. Clara watched them breathe, in and out, in and out. 7 lives depending on her, 7 hearts she would die to protect. What happens now, she asked. Now we dig out, check the horses, get back on the road. Nate stood, stretching muscles stiff from a night on hard ground. My homestead is still a day away. We should make it before nightfall if the weather holds. And Silus? Nate's face hardened. He will lick his wounds for now. Man like that does not like being challenged. He will want revenge. How long do we have? Week. Maybe. He will need to gather men, make a plan. Crow is smart. He will not come at us direct. He will find another angle. Clara stood, brushed dirt from her skirt. Then we have a week to prepare. Nate looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise. Respect. Something warmer. You are not scared. Terrified. She met his gaze. But I stopped letting fear make my decisions a long time ago. He nodded slowly. Good. Because what is coming will not be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. They woke the children one by one. Abigail first, who immediately started checking on her siblings. Then Benjamin, grumpy and sore but determined. Charlotte bounced up like she had slept in a feather bed, ready to conquer the world. Daniel coughed a few times, but seemed stronger than yesterday. Emma helped the twins get untangled from their blankets, bossing them with cheerful authority. Mama. Grace tugged at Clara's hand. I am hungry. Me too, Hope echoed. I know, babies, we will eat soon. Nate produced hardtack and dried beef from his supplies. Not much, but enough. The children ate without complaint, a luxury they had learned never to expect. Mr. Stone? Daniel's voice was quiet. Yeah? Is your house big? Big enough. Will we all have beds? Nate paused, considering. There are 2 rooms, my room and a main room. We will figure out sleeping arrangements when we get there. Will we have to share? Charlotte made a face. I do not want to share with Emma. She kicks. I do not. You do too. You kicked me right in the stomach last week. That was an accident. Girls, Clara's voice carried warning. Nate's mouth twitched. You might have to share for a while, but I can build more rooms. Cabin has got space to expand. You can build things? Benjamin asked, interested despite himself. Built the whole homestead myself. Cabin, barn, fences, everything. Could you teach me? The question hung in the air. Clara held her breath. Nate looked at Benjamin. At this 12-year-old boy trying so hard to be a man. If you want to learn, he said finally, I will teach you. Benjamin's face changed. The hostility, the suspicion, the fear. It did not disappear. But something else pushed through, something like hope. I want to learn, he said. Then we will start when we get home. Home. The word echoed through the cabin. The sun was sinking behind the mountains when Nate pulled the wagon to a stop. There, he said quietly. That is home. Clara looked up. Her breath caught in her throat. The homestead sat on a ridge overlooking a small valley. A cabin built of hand-hewn logs, solid and square. A barn to the left. Fenced pasture beyond. Smoke rising from a stone chimney. Mountains standing guard on three sides like ancient sentinels. Mama. Emma's voice was hushed. It is beautiful. Clara could not speak. She had expected a shack, a rough shelter barely fit for animals. She had prepared herself for hardship, for suffering, for survival at its most basic. She had not prepared for this. You built all of this? Benjamin asked, disbelief cracking his voice. By yourself? Nate shrugged. Had 8 years and nothing but time. But the cabin alone must have taken 2 years for the main structure, another 6 months for the barn. Fences took 3 summers. He clicked the reins. Work goes slow when you are alone. Clara felt something shift in her chest. This was not just a homestead. This was 8 years of grief poured into wood and stone. 8 years of a man trying to build something, anything, to fill the emptiness inside him. There is only one way up, Nate said, gesturing to the trail behind them. Cliff drops on the other 3 sides. A man with a rifle could hold this position against an army. Is that why you built here? Clara asked. Partly. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. Mostly, I just like the view. Charlotte scrambled out of the wagon before anyone could stop her. She ran to the edge of the ridge and stood there, red hair whipping in the wind, staring out at the valley below. I can see forever, she shouted. Mama, come look, I can see the whole world. Charlotte, get away from that edge. She is fine. Nate climbed down and offered Clara his hand. Ground is solid there. I checked it 100 times. Clara hesitated, then took his hand. Let him help her down. Why did you check it 100 times? Nate's jaw tightened. Mary used to run to that spot every morning, said she could see angels in the clouds. Clara's heart clenched. Oh, Nate, it is all right. His voice was gruff. It was a long time ago. But it was not all right. She could see it in his eyes. 8 years. And the wound was still raw. The inside of the cabin was dim, lit only by the fading sunlight through 2 small windows. Clara stepped in, letting her eyes adjust. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Cold now, but clean. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. A bed in the corner, neatly made with a worn quilt. Shelves lined with supplies. Flour, salt, dried beans. Hooks on the wall holding tools, a coat, a spare rifle. Everything was clean. Everything was ordered. Everything was lonely. Like I said, Nate muttered. Not much. Clara walked to the center of the room, turned slowly, taking it all in. It is perfect, she said. Nate blinked. What? It is solid. It is warm. It is safe. She met his eyes. After everything we have been through, that is all that matters. But there is only 1 bed, only 2 chairs. I do not have... We will manage. Clara started rolling up her sleeves. We have slept on factory floors. We have gone weeks without chairs. This is a palace compared to where we have been. Benjamin looked around, his face unreadable. Where will we all sleep? We will figure it out. Clara started toward the fireplace. First we need a fire, then food. Then we will worry about beds. Nate stood frozen, watching her move through his cabin like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. I can start the fire, he said finally. Good. Abigail, help me with the supplies. Benjamin, bring in the blankets from the wagon. Charlotte and Emma, you are on water duty. There is a well outside. Daniel, you sit by the fire and rest. You are still recovering. But Mama, I want to help. You are helping. You are getting strong so you can help more tomorrow. Within an hour, the cabin had transformed. A fire roared in the hearth, casting warm light across the room. The table was covered with supplies being sorted and organized. Children's voices filled the space, bickering, laughing, asking questions. Nate stood by the door, watching, like a man who had wandered into someone else's dream. "Mr. Stone?" Grace tugged at his pants leg. "Are you okay?" He looked down at the 4-year-old. Her gray eyes, so like his own, stared up at him with concern. "I am fine," he said gruffly. "You look scared." "I am not scared. My mama says it is okay to be scared sometimes." Grace tilted her head. "She says being scared just means you care about something." Nate crouched down to her level. "Your mama is a smart woman." "I know," Grace smiled. "Are you going to be our new papa?" The question hit Nate like a punch to the gut. He stopped, looked at Clara across the room. She had frozen, her hands still on a sack of flour, her eyes on him. "I do not know," Nate said honestly. "That is up to your mama." Grace considered this. "Okay, but I hope you are. You have nice eyes." She skipped away to join her twin, leaving Nate crouched on the floor, struggling to remember how to breathe. Clara appeared beside him. "Sorry about that." Grace says whatever comes into her head. "It is fine." He stood slowly. She is a good kid. They all are." Clara paused. "She is right, though. You do have nice eyes." Nate felt heat crawl up his neck. I should check on the horses." He fled before Clara could respond. Outside, the cold air hit Nate like a slap. He leaned against the barn door, pressing his palms against the rough wood, forcing himself to breathe. 8 years. 8 years alone. And now his cabin was full of children, full of laughter, full of life. He did not know if he could do this. He did not know if he could bear to lose it again. "You all right?" He turned. Benjamin stood a few feet away, a bucket in each hand. "Fine," Nate said. "Just needed air." Benjamin nodded slowly. "It is a lot. All of us, I mean. We are a lot. You are not a lot." "We are, though." Benjamin set down the buckets and leaned against the fence. 7 kids. Mama with no husband. Nothing but the clothes on our backs and a wagon full of trouble. He kicked at a rock. "You did not know what you were getting into. I knew exactly what I was getting into." "Then why?" Benjamin's voice cracked. "Why us? Why pay $300 for a family that is nothing but problems?" Nate was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the mountains, black against the darkening sky. "You know what it is like to be alone?" he asked finally. Benjamin shook his head. "It is quiet, real quiet. At first you think you like it. No one bothering you. No one needing anything from you. Just you and the wind and the work. Sounds peaceful. It is. For a while." Nate turned to face him. "Then one day you wake up and you realize you have not spoken to another human being in 3 months. You realize you have forgotten what your own voice sounds like. You realize that if you died tomorrow, no one would know. No one would care. You would just rot in that cabin until some trapper stumbled across your bones." Benjamin said nothing. "That is not peace," Nate continued. "That is death. Slow death. The kind that kills you from the inside while your body keeps walking around." He paused. "Your family is not a problem, son. Your family is life. Loud, messy, complicated life. And I would rather have that than one more day of quiet." Benjamin's eyes glistened in the fading light. "You lost your daughter," he said quietly. "Yes. She was younger than Danny?" "Yes. What was she like?" The question seemed to hit Nate like a physical blow. He looked away, jaw working. She had her mother's eyes, he said finally. Brown, warm. She laughed at everything. Even when she was sick, she laughed. His voice cracked. I have not heard a child laugh in 8 years. Emma stepped forward. Clara had not even noticed her follow them outside. I can laugh, Emma said, if you want. Nate looked at her. This 6-year-old girl with golden curls and a smile that could light up the darkest room. I do not... Emma did not wait. She giggled, loud and bright and completely ridiculous given the circumstances. Charlotte snorted from the doorway. That is not a real laugh. This is a real laugh. She started cackling like a chicken being chased. That is terrible, Benjamin said, and despite himself he cracked a smile. Daniel started giggling. The twins, sensing the shift in mood, joined in with their high-pitched squeals. And Clara felt her heart crack open. She laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, somewhere she had forgotten existed. A real laugh, her first in years. Nate stood frozen, watching them. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then he smiled. Not much, just a twitch of the lips, a softening around those hard gray eyes. But it was real. You are all crazy, he said gruffly. Probably, Charlotte agreed. Mama says it runs in the family. I did not say that. You thought it. Charlotte Marie Beckett. Stone, Charlotte corrected. We are Stones now, right? That is how it works? Clara hesitated. She looked at Nate. He cleared his throat. Legally, yeah, but you do not have to... I like it. Charlotte nodded firmly. Charlotte Stone sounds like someone who would punch a bad guy. It sounds like trouble, Benjamin muttered. Trouble is good. Keeps things interesting. You would think that. Better than being boring like you. I am not boring. I am responsible. Same thing. It is not. Enough. Clara's voice was tired but warm. Both of you, we are stuck here together for a long time. We might as well not kill each other. The children settled, still bickering in low voices, but no longer sharp with fear. Clara watched them arrange themselves around the fire. Abigail finding a corner to rest with the twins. Benjamin checking the wood pile. Charlotte teaching Emma how to properly hold a stick like a club. Daniel curling up under a blanket near the hearth. Nate sat by the door, rifle across his knees, eyes on the darkness outside. Clara moved to sit beside him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For telling them. For being honest. He shrugged. They deserved the truth. They deserved a choice. And you gave them one. He looked at her. In the firelight, his face was all harsh angles and deep shadows, but his eyes, those gray eyes, were soft. You are stronger than you know, he said. All of you. We have had to be. That is not the same thing. He shook his head. Having to be strong is survival. Choosing to stay strong when you could break, that is something else. That is courage. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. You are not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? A monster. That is what they said you were. A killer. A madman who lived in the mountains because civilized folk could not stand him. Some of that is true. Which parts? He was quiet for a long moment. I killed men in the war, too many to count. Came home with blood on my hands and nightmares in my head. Could not stand to be around people after that. Every loud noise made me jump. Every stranger made me reach for a weapon. His voice roughened. Sarah was the only one who could calm me. When she died, I had no reason to stay among the living, but you stayed. My body did. Rest of me was gone. He looked at the fire. Being alone for 8 years, it changes a man. Makes him hard. Makes him forget what it is like to have something worth protecting. I thought I was doing fine. Thought I had made peace with it. He paused. Then I saw you on that platform, and I realized I had been dead the whole time. Just too stubborn to lie down. Clara reached out, slowly, carefully. She placed her hand over his. He flinched, a tiny movement, but she felt it. I am sorry, she started to pull back. His hand turned over, caught hers, held it gently. "Do not be." His voice was rough. It has been a long time since anyone touched me like that. Like I was human." They sat in silence. The fire crackled. The storm raged outside. The children whispered and giggled and slowly fell asleep. "We are going to make it," Clara said finally. "Are we not?" Nate squeezed her hand. "Yeah, we are." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Nate taught Clara how to shoot. She had known the basics. Her father had shown her years ago, but Nate's instruction was different. Precise, patient, focused. "Do not aim for the body," he told her. "Too easy to miss or just wound. Aim for center mass. And squeeze. Do not pull. What if I freeze? You will not. How do you know? Because you are a mother. And mothers do not freeze when their children are in danger. They fight." By the third day, Clara could hit a target at 50 yards more often than she missed. Abigail learned too. And Charlotte, despite Clara's protests. "I am 10, Charlotte argued. "I am practically grown. You are a child. I am a child who is going to shoot anyone who tries to hurt my sisters." Clara could not argue with that logic. Even Daniel helped, carrying ammunition and water, keeping watch from the ridge. Emma entertained the twins, keeping them calm with songs and stories. They were becoming something. Not just a family. An army. On the evening of the third day, Clara sat on the porch with Nate, watching the sunset behind the mountains. "He should be there by now," she said. "Benjamin." They had made a decision, a desperate one. Benjamin had ridden to Fort Collins, 2 days away, to find the territorial marshal, to bring help. Clara had argued against it, had refused at first, but Nate had been right. One man could not hold off an army forever, and Crow would bring an army. "Probably," Nate said, "if he pushed hard. What if the marshal does not believe him? What if he will not help? Then we face Crow alone." Nate's jaw tightened. "But we face him together." Clara leaned against his shoulder. 3 days ago, she would have hesitated. Now it felt natural. "Right. I never thought I would be here," she said quietly. "Where?" "Sitting on a porch in the mountains, waiting for outlaws, learning to shoot." She laughed softly. 2 weeks ago, I was standing on an auction block praying someone would want me. Someone did. I know." She turned to look at him. "Why? Why did you really do it, Nate? And do not give me the speech about loneliness. There is something else, something you have not told me." Nate was silent for a long moment. His gray eyes stared at the fading light. "The day before the auction," he said finally, "I went to Sarah's grave. I go every year on the anniversary. I talk to her, tell her about the year. Stupid, I know. It is not stupid. This time was different. I sat there for hours, could not think of anything to say, and then I realized why." He swallowed. "It is because I had stopped living. I was going through the motions, but I was not alive. I was just waiting to die and join her." Clara's hand found his. "I asked her what to do," Nate continued. "I do not believe in ghosts, do not believe in signs, but I swear, Clara." Right then, a wind came through the cemetery, and I heard. He stopped, shook his head. "What did you hear?" I heard her laugh. Mary's laugh. Just for a second. And then it was gone. His voice cracked. But I knew. I knew I had to stop waiting to die and start choosing to live. And then you found us. And then I found you." He turned to look at her. "Standing on that platform, holding your children, fighting for them, with nothing but your pride." He reached up, touched her cheek. "You are not a replacement for Sarah, Clara. You are not a way to forget her. You are a reason to keep going, a reason to want tomorrow." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She did not try to stop them. Nate, yeah? She leaned forward. She leaned and kissed him. It was not passionate, was not hungry. It was gentle, careful. Two broken people finding something whole in the space between them. When she pulled back, Nate's eyes were wet. "I do not deserve you," he whispered. "You do." She cupped his face in her hands. "You do, Nathaniel Stone. And do not let anyone tell you different." They sat together as the stars came out, hand in hand, not speaking, not needing to. And then Charlotte's voice shattered the silence. "Mama, riders coming, fast." Clara's heart stopped. She ran to the ridge edge, Nate beside her. Below, in the darkness, torches flickered, a lot of them, moving up the trail. "How many?" Clara asked. Her voice was steady, despite the terror clawing at her chest. Nate counted. His face went pale. 20, maybe more. He turned to her. "Get the children to the cellar, now." "Nate." "Now, Clara. Whatever happens, you keep them safe. What about you? I will hold them off as long as I can. That is suicide. It is necessary." He grabbed her arms, pulled her close. "Listen to me. There is a way out of the cellar, a tunnel I dug years ago. It comes out by the river, half a mile east. If I fall, you take the children and you run. You do not look back. You hear me? I will not leave you. You will. Because those children need their mother more than they need me." His voice broke. "Please, Clara. Promise me." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to grab him and hold him and never let go, but the torches were getting closer. "I promise," she whispered. Nate kissed her, hard and desperate and final. "I love you," he said. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Clara Stone. And whatever happens tonight, I need you to know that. I love you too." The words came easy, because they were true. "I love you, Nate." He smiled, the first real smile she had ever seen on his face. "Then I have already won," he said. "Whatever they take from me, they cannot take that. Take." He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the trail. Clara ran toward the cabin. "Everyone up," she shouted, bursting through the door. "Cellar, now!" The children moved. 3 days of preparation had drilled it into them. Abigail grabbed the twins. Charlotte grabbed Emma. Daniel stumbled but kept his feet. Clara opened the trapdoor to the cellar. "Down. Go." They went, one by one, disappearing into the darkness below. Gunshots echoed from the ridge. Clara froze at the trapdoor. Looking back through the window, she could see muzzle flashes, could hear Nate's rifle, could hear men shouting, screaming. "Mama!" Abigail called from below. "Mama, come on!" Clara did not move. Nate was out there, fighting, dying, and she had promised to run. More gunshots. A scream that might have been Nate's voice, might have been. "Mama." Clara grabbed the rifle Nate had given her, the one she had practiced with for 3 days, the one she had sworn to use only as a last resort. "Abigail," she said calmly, "if I am not back in 10 minutes, you take your brothers and sisters through the tunnel, you run, and you do not stop until you reach Fort Collins." "Mama, no, promise me." "I cannot. Promise me." Abigail Grace Stone. Silence from below. Then, broken. "I promise." Clara closed the trapdoor, pushed a heavy chest over it. If Crow's men found it, they would have to work to get through. Then she ran outside. The ridge was chaos. Nate had taken cover behind the firewood pile, rifle blazing. 3 men lay still on the ground. 4 more were taking cover, shooting back. But more were coming. Always more. Clara raised her rifle, found a target, squeezed the trigger. The man spun, clutching his shoulder. She did not have time to think about what she had done. She worked the action, found another target, fired again. "Clara." Nate's voice, shocked. "What are you doing?" "Fighting. I told you to run. You are not my husband yet, Nathaniel Stone. You do not get to give me orders." Despite everything, Nate laughed. A wild, desperate sound. "You are crazy. You married me. More men coming up the trail." Clara fired until her rifle was empty, ducked behind a water barrel to reload. "Stone." Silas Crow's voice rang out over the chaos. This does not have to end in blood. Send out the woman and we ride away. Go to hell, Crow, have it your way. A torch arced through the air, landed on the cabin roof. Clara's heart stopped. The dry wood caught immediately. Flames licked up toward the sky. No! She started to run toward the cabin. Nate grabbed her arm. The cellar! The children are in the cellar. They ran together, dodging bullets, crashing through the cabin door. Smoke was already filling the room, heat pressing down. Clara shoved the chest aside, yanked open the trap door. Abigail, the tunnel, go now, coughing from below. Then movement, shadows disappearing into darkness. Clara! Nate pulled her toward the door. We have to. The ceiling groaned, cracked. Nate shoved Clara out the door just as a burning beam crashed down where she had been standing. They tumbled into the yard, coughing, gasping, and Silas Crow stood over them, pistol in hand, smile stretching across his face. Finally he said, I do love it when they make it difficult. Clara looked up at him, at this man who had hunted her family, who had burned her home, who stood now with the power of life and death in his hands. You cannot have them, she said. You will never have them. Oh, my dear. Silas cocked the pistol. I already do. He aimed at Nate. Clara did not think. She lunged. Clara's body slammed into Silas just as the pistol fired. The shot went wide, screaming past Nate's head into the burning cabin. Silas stumbled backward, cursing, and Clara fell with him, her fingers clawing at his gun hand. You stupid woman! She did not let him finish. She drove her knee into his stomach with every ounce of strength she had. Silas doubled over, gasping, and the pistol flew from his grip, skittering across the frozen ground. Clara scrambled for it. Silas grabbed her ankle, yanked her back. She hit the ground hard, breath exploding from her lungs. He was on her in an instant, hands closing around her throat. Should have taken my offer, he hissed, his face inches from hers. Would have been easier for everyone. Clara could not breathe, could not think. Black spots danced in her vision. But she could still fight. Her hand found a rock, small, sharp. She swung it with everything she had. The rock connected with Silas's temple. He howled, grip loosening just enough for Clara to twist free. She rolled, gasping, crawling toward the pistol. Her fingers closed around cold metal. She turned, raising the gun just as Silas lunged for her again. Stop! The voice was not hers, was not Nate's. Everyone froze. Benjamin stood at the edge of the ridge, mounted on Runner, a rifle in his hands. Behind him, a dozen men on horseback spread out in formation, and at their head, wearing a silver star on his chest, rode a man with a gray beard and eyes like flint. Silas Crow. The marshal's voice rang out across the chaos. You are under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Order your men to stand down. Silas's face twisted. You have no jurisdiction here. I have jurisdiction everywhere in this territory. The marshal urged his horse forward. And I have a dozen witnesses to what you have done tonight, including a 12-year-old boy who rode 2 days without stopping to tell me exactly what kind of man you are. Clara's heart swelled. Benjamin, her brave, impossible son. Silas looked around. His men were backing away, hands rising, weapons dropping. The fight had gone out of them the moment they saw the silver star. This is not over, Silas snarled. It is. Nate's voice came from behind Clara. He had found his rifle, and it was trained on Silas's chest. You are done, Crow. You have been done since the moment you threatened my family. Your family. The words hit Clara like sunlight after a storm. Marshal? Silas forced a smile, spreading his hands. This is a misunderstanding. I came here to burn down a man's home with children inside? The marshal dismounted. Drawing his pistol, I saw the flames from a mile away. I saw your men shooting. I saw you with your hands around that woman's throat. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to ice. Do not insult my intelligence. 2 deputies moved forward, grabbing Silas's arms, forcing them behind his back. You will regret this, Silus spat. I have friends in high places, lawyers, politicians. You cannot. I can, and I am. The marshal nodded to his men. Take him. Take all of them. Clara watched as Silas Crow was dragged away, still shouting threats, still promising revenge. But his voice grew fainter with every step, swallowed by the night and the crackling of the burning cabin. Then Benjamin was there, sliding off his horse, running toward her. Mama. She caught him in her arms, holding so tight she thought she might break them both. You did it, she whispered against his hair. You did it, Benjamin. You saved us. I promised I would come back. His voice cracked. I promised. I know, baby. I know. Nate appeared beside them, one hand on Benjamin's shoulder. You rode hard, son, harder than most men could. Benjamin looked up at him, eyes shining. I had to. They are my family. Nate's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. Yes, they are. The children. Clara pulled back suddenly, panic flooding through her. Abigail and the others. The tunnel. I will find them. Nate squeezed her arm. Stay here. He ran toward the edge of the ridge, disappearing into the darkness. Clara held Benjamin close, watching the cabin burn, watching her hope turn to ash. Everything they had built, everything they had started to become, gone. Ma'am. She turned. The marshal stood before her, hat in his hands, face creased with concern. I am sorry we did not get here sooner. The boy pushed hard, but the mountains are unforgiving. You came. Clara's voice broke. That is what matters. Your son has got courage, ma'am. Rode into Fort Collins half dead from exhaustion. Would not rest until he told his story. The marshal shook his head. I have seen grown men with less grit. He gets it from his father. Clara looked at Benjamin, remembering Samuel, remembering the man who had loved her, who had given her 7 children, who had died too young, both his fathers. Benjamin's eyes widened, but he did not speak, just held her tighter. Voices echoed from the darkness. Clara's heart lurched. Then Nate emerged from the tree line. And he was not alone. Abigail came first, carrying Hope on her hip, then Charlotte, her red hair wild, leading Grace by the hand. Daniel stumbled behind them, pale but standing, and Emma. Emma ran straight to Clara, crashing into her legs with the force of a small hurricane. Mama, the tunnel was dark and scary, but Abby said we had to be brave. And I was brave, Mama. I was so brave. Clara dropped to her knees, gathering as many children as she could reach. They piled onto her, all of them, 7 bodies pressing close, 7 hearts beating against hers. You are safe, she whispered. You are all safe. The cabin is burning, Daniel said quietly. I know, sweetheart. Where will we live? Clara looked at the flames consuming everything Nate had built. 8 years of work, 8 years of grief poured into wood and stone, gone in minutes. We will figure it out, she said. We always do. Nate stood apart, watching the fire. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes, his gray eyes, held something broken. Clara gently untangled herself from the children and went to him. Nate. He did not look at her. I built that cabin with my own hands. Every log, every nail. Sarah helped me choose the spot. Mary took her first steps on that floor. Clara's heart ached. I am sorry. Do not be. His voice was hollow. It was just wood, just stone. What matters is... He stopped, swallowed hard. What matters is what? He finally turned to look at her, at the children huddled together behind her, at Benjamin standing tall with the marshal's men. What matters is you are alive, he said quietly. All of you. That is worth more than any cabin. Clara took his hand. We will rebuild. Clara, we will rebuild, Nate. Together. That is what families do. Something shifted in his face. Something like hope. Fragile and new. Family, he repeated, like he was testing the word. Clara squeezed his hand. You are not alone anymore. You have not been since the moment you said $300. A sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Something in between. I do not deserve you, he whispered. Stop saying that. Clara reached up, cupping his face in her hands. You deserve everything, Nathaniel Stone. And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. She kissed him. This time it was not careful, was not gentle. It was fierce and desperate and full of everything she could not say. You! Charlotte's voice rang out. Mama is kissing Mr. Stone. They are married, Abigail said wearily. They are allowed. It is still gross. Everything is gross to you. Not everything, just kissing. Clara pulled back, laughing despite everything, laughing because her children were bickering and her house was burning and Silas Crow was finally gone, laughing because she was alive, because they all were. The marshal approached, clearing his throat. Ma'am, Mr. Stone, I hate to interrupt, but we should get moving. It is a cold night, and those children need shelter. Where? Clara asked. There is a way station about 3 miles east. Basic, but warm. You can stay there tonight. The marshal paused. Tomorrow we will figure out the rest. Nate nodded slowly. Thank you, Marshal, for everything. Thank your boy. The marshal glanced at Benjamin. He is the one who would not give up. They gathered what they could salvage. Blankets from the wagon, food supplies, weapons. The children were exhausted, stumbling with fatigue. But none of them complained. They had survived too much to complain about a 3-mile walk. As they started down the trail, Clara looked back once at the burning cabin. Do not look back, Nate said quietly beside her. I have to. Why? Clara watched the flames reach toward the stars. Because I want to remember what we lost. So, I never forget what we still have. Nate was silent for a moment. Then he took her hand. We will build something better, he said. Bigger. With rooms for all the children. A proper kitchen. Maybe a porch where we can sit and watch the sunset. That sounds nice. It does it not? He almost smiled. Have not thought about the future in a long time. Feels strange. Good strange or bad strange? Good. He squeezed her fingers. Definitely good. They walked through the night, a strange procession of deputies and children and 2 people who had found each other against all odds. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind whispered through the pines. And Clara Stone, who had been sold on an auction block for $300, walked into her future with her head held high. The way station was small but warm. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the marshal's men quickly had a roaring blaze going. The children collapsed onto blankets spread across the floor, too tired to argue about sleeping arrangements. Clara tucked them in one by one. Grace and Hope first, curled together as always. Emma next, clutching the small wooden horse Daniel had whittled for her. Daniel himself, still pale, but breathing steadily. Charlotte, who fell asleep mid-complaint about something or other. Benjamin insisted on staying up to keep watch. Clara did not argue. She just handed him a blanket and told him to wake Nate if he heard anything. Abigail sat by the fire, mending a tear in Daniel's shirt. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but her eyes were distant. Abby, Clara sat beside her. What is wrong? Nothing. Abigail, her daughter sighed. Set down the needle. I keep thinking about what that man said. Crow, she hugged herself. About how everything is for sale, about finding the right price. Clara's stomach tightened. He was trying to scare us. It worked. Abigail's voice trembled. Mama, what if he comes back? What if he finds a way to get to us? What if... He will not. You do not know that. I know Nate will protect us. Nate is one man. Crow has dozens. Nate has us. Clara gripped her daughter's hands. Listen to me. We are not helpless. We are not victims. We are survivors. And we will fight for each other with everything we have. But I am scared, Mama. I know, baby. So am I. Clara pulled her close. But being scared together is better than being scared alone. Abigail buried her face in her mother's shoulder. For a moment she was not 14 and too grown. She was just a child, seeking comfort in the only place that had ever been safe. I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you will ever know. After Abigail fell asleep, Clara found Nate outside on the porch. He sat on an old wooden chair, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. You should sleep, she said, settling beside him. Cannot. Not tonight. Crow? Maybe. Maybe just habit. He shifted the rifle. I have not had anyone to protect in a long time. Feels strange to have something to lose again. Clara was quiet for a moment. The stars were thick above them, brighter than anything she had ever seen in the city. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you not remarry? After Sarah died, you are not old, you are not ugly, you could have found someone else. Nate stared at the sky. Did not want anyone else. You did not want to be alone for 8 years either. No, but I figured being alone was better than losing someone again. He paused. I was wrong. What changed your mind? You. He turned to look at her. Standing on that platform, holding your children together, looking at that crowd like you dared them to break you. His voice softened. I thought there is a woman who understands, who knows what it is like to lose everything and keep going anyway. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I did not feel strong up there. I felt terrified. That is what makes it strong, being terrified and standing anyway. She reached out, took his hand. This time he did not flinch. I do not know what is going to happen, Clara said quietly. I do not know if Crow will come back. I do not know if we will survive here. I do not know anything anymore. She squeezed his fingers. But I know I am glad you found us. Clara, his voice was rough. Yes? He turned to face her fully. In the starlight, his eyes were silver. I cannot promise you love. I do not know if I remember how. But I can promise you safety. I can promise that as long as I am breathing, no one will hurt you or your children. And I can promise to try. He swallowed, to try to be something worth caring about. Clara lifted her hand to his face, touched the scar on his cheek, gently, like she was touching something precious. You are already worth caring about, she whispered. You just forgot. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Nate leaned forward, pressed his forehead against hers, breathed. I am scared, he admitted. I know. She smiled through her tears. So am I. They stayed like that as the stars wheeled overhead. Not kissing, not speaking, just breathing together. Two broken people finding something whole in the space between them. Spring came early that year. By April, the new cabin stood on the ridge, bigger and stronger than before. Benjamin had helped lay every log, his young muscles aching, but his heart proud. Charlotte had insisted on installing the door handle herself. Even the twins had contributed, carrying small stones for the fireplace, while Emma supervised with all the authority of a 6-year-old general. Clara stood on the new porch, wider than the old one, with a rocking chair Nate had built just for her, and watched her family work in the yard below. Abigail was teaching Daniel to ride properly, patient and encouraging. Benjamin was helping Nate repair the fence, the two of them working in comfortable silence. Charlotte chased Emma around the vegetable garden while the twins shrieked with laughter. 7 children, 1 husband, a home built from ashes and hope. Clara's hand drifted to her stomach, where a new secret grew. She had not told Nate yet, had not told anyone. But soon, when the time was right. Nate looked up from his work, as if sensing her gaze. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and softened all the hard edges of his face. She smiled back. 2 months ago, she had stood on an auction block, praying for someone, anyone, to see her worth. Now she stood on her own porch, surrounded by love, surrounded by family, surrounded by everything she had never dared to dream. The world had called her worthless, undesirable, a burden. The world had been wrong, because Clara Stone was not worthless. She was a mother who had held her family together through poverty and grief and fire. She was a wife who had fought beside her husband against impossible odds. She was a survivor who had turned $300 and a stranger's gamble into something beautiful. She was enough. She had always been enough. And now, finally, she knew it. "Mama," Emma called from the yard. "Come play with us." Clara laughed, rising from her chair, walking down the porch steps toward her children, toward her husband, toward the life they had built together from nothing but courage and love. The mountains watched over them like ancient guardians. The sky stretched endless and blue, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out, riding the wind toward the horizon. Clara Stone had been sold for $300 on a cold January day. But what she found was worth more than any amount of gold. She found family. She found home. She found herself. And that was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.